highly anticipated sequel to the 1989 classic Beetlejuice is here with Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. And set 30 years after the original, Lydia is still haunted by Beetlejuice, and her life is turned upside down when they return to the home in Winter River and her teenage daughter Astrid accidentally opens the portal to the afterlife. Hi, my name is Zach, and I cannot watch a movie without having to talk about it afterwards. If you're the same way, you're in the right place. Consider hitting that subscribe button. And with that in mind, join me down in the comment section below. Tell me all your thoughts on Beetlejuice Beetlejuice and its original 1989 Beetlejuice. And for some backstory and context to my history with Beetlejuice, I'm not the hugest fan of Tim Burton. I do enjoy Beetlejuice though. In fact, Beetlejuice might just be the Tim Burton movie that I enjoy the most. I enjoy the dark humor of it all while keeping it lighthearted, and of course Michael Keaton's performance as Beetlejuice. Even though he's only in the movie here and there very sparingly, I've always enjoyed Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice. Now coming into Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, I was kind of optimistically concerned about it because, as mentioned before, not the biggest Tim Burton fan. This is 30 years after the first Beetlejuice, and as we all have seen in the past, when you take what is a comedy, and Beetlejuice is essentially a dark comedy at its core, and you do it again 30 years later, doesn't always work out the best. So with all of those preconceived assumptions, I went into Beetlejuice Beetlejuice hoping for the best. Right off the bat, you got to talk about what works in this movie. And one of the things that works in this movie, that has to work in this movie, that thankfully definitely works in this movie, is Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice himself. Michael Keaton returning to this role 30 years after he first made it iconic in 1989. I can't even imagine the pressure that is on him to deliver with this character, and he doesn't skip a beat. He feels like he's pulled right out of 1989. You do not see the age on him. He's wearing a lot of makeup, but still, he's just as energetic. He's just as erratic of a character as Beetlejuice as he is in the original. He's still got the one-liners. He still has the sharp, witty humor, and he is still so entertaining whenever he is on screen. And thankfully, in Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, the title doesn't lie. There is more Beetlejuice in this one than there is in the predecessor. He still kind of pops up when necessary, but there's definitely a lot more Beetlejuice to endure and to enjoy in Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. And on top of just Michael Keaton returning as Beetlejuice, the whole cast here I thought did a great job. Jenna Ortega being introduced in this, she fits in seamlessly. She was so good. Catherine O'Hara returning, I loved her character in this movie. I liked Catherine O'Hara in the first one. Here, coming off of Schitt's Creek and stuff like that, her comedic timing is able to shine. She's got such great comedic chops, and she is one of the standouts in this movie. I could even argue she is more of a standout in Beetlejuice Beetlejuice than Beetlejuice himself. And something that I really appreciated about Beetlejuice Beetlejuice that they talked a lot about in interviews and building up to the film is how this film tries to tie back to its 1989 predecessor visually and aesthetically, and the way that it's doing that is through using practical effects. It's using good old-fashioned puppetry. It's using stop-motion animation. There's some claymation. There's a whole sequence in this movie that is just well, it's probably CGI claymation, but it looks like good old-fashioned 80s claymation in here, and it works brilliantly. It really does make this sequel feel like if you watched the 1989, you could just springboard into this one, and visually there's really no difference in the quality, and it's really fun to just go back to the old school effects. Like, just because we have the CGI, and this movie does use CGI, don't get me wrong, but it uses CGI very appropriately where it's necessary, where you can't do what you could do back in the 80s. You know, when you have that enhancement nowadays, they use it well, but when you can still do the puppeteering, when you can still go into the afterlife and show all the crazy costumes and makeup, they go for it, they stick true to it, and it's just a nostalgic, charming feeling that you get, just like when you watch the original. And that's another thing that's a lot of fun in this movie. We get to explore a lot more of this ghost world afterlife that was set up in the previous film. They get to go deeper into it, deal with more characters, deal with more of the bureaucracy of the whole thing, and it's just a really fun environment to get to be in and to explore. And the fact that we got to delve deeper into it in the sequel was a really welcome surprise, and I thought worked really, really well for what the movie was trying to do. But that doesn't mean that what the movie was trying to do always worked for me. Now, there was definitely the things, as mentioned before, that work in this sequel for Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. But as a whole, this movie, it didn't really work for me. And one of the big reasons for that is the story here. Because, it's 30 years later. So they have to come up with a reason. There has to be a point to everything in this movie. Why is Beetlejuice back? Why would they let themselves get into another situation where they allow Beetlejuice back into their life? That is a question that the movie has to answer in order to get a story going. And I felt like in this sequel in particular, it didn't really know how exactly they were going to get a reasonable, logical explanation as to why Beetlejuice comes back into Lydia's life. And in that way, it feels like they came up with 4 drafts of movies that were possible reasons as to why Beetlejuice was going to come back in a sequel. And instead of just picking one of those 4 drafts, they decided to just go ahead and adapt all 4 of those drafts, put them into this movie, and in that they created a situation where they have a lot of plot lines and subplots for all these characters going on in this movie that they're trying to bring together in a cohesive way. And for me, it just never did come together in a cohesive way. It just made the film feel like it was a scatterbrained mess that didn't really know what it wanted to focus on. You've got 4 main plot lines in here. You've got a plot line in here involving Lydia having to get Beetlejuice's help. You've got a plot line in here involving Jenna Ortega meeting a boy that she likes and starting a relationship there. You've got a plot line of Beetlejuice and an ex-wife of his coming back for revenge. And you've got a plot line in here of a detective character trying to track down Beetlejuice in the afterlife. There's a lot of stuff going on in this movie, and the movie doesn't have enough dedication to each of these subplots to make them feel meaningful, significant, or that they work when they come together. It feels very unbalanced, unfocused, and like I said, just a little bit scatterbrained. In particular, when it involves Beetlejuice's ex-wife, played by Monica Bellucci, and Willem Dafoe's detective character in the afterlife, those 2 subplots in particular, to me, felt like they had really no significance to be in the story. If you removed those 2 characters, if you removed them out and their subplots out of the movie, the overall plot that is happening in the movie doesn't really get that affected. And when it comes to Monica Bellucci as the ex-wife, it just feels like she's running around aimlessly in the background for the majority of the movie. You never feel like she is the threat to Beetlejuice that the movie wants you to feel that she is. And as I said before, the original 1989 Beetlejuice at its core is a dark comedy, and I found the movie quite funny. I think the first Beetlejuice has a really sharp wit to it, and I feel like the humor in Beetlejuice Beetlejuice really let me down because it feels like it lost that sharp wit and replaced that with just gross out humor. Because even though Beetlejuice Beetlejuice is rated PG-13, this movie delves more into the horrific imagery, into the horror aspects of the film. Thus, it's got a lot more gore sequences. It's got a lot more gross out humor, goo and gus and pus falling from people's mouths and faces and guts spilling out and blood shooting up. Like, if you're a gore fanatic, if you like the gore and the horror in your movies, I think there's going to be a lot of fun that you're going to have with this. But for me personally, it lost what I liked about the original Beetlejuice. It lost that sharp, dark humor wit, and it just became kind of unnecessarily gross to me. And in that way, I didn't really find myself laughing all that much during Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Michael Keaton had some pretty good one-liners, but as a whole, the comedy in this movie really didn't work for me. Even when they try to do sequences similar or pay an homage to what happened in the 1989 classic, for example, there's a wedding sequence where everyone's lip-syncing to a song, it just felt off to me. The humor here just wasn't clicking with me. And for that reason, and for a couple of those reasons that I mentioned, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice honestly was a pretty disappointing movie to me. There were definitely things I liked. As mentioned before, Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice killed it, came back without missing a beat. The cast was great. Loved seeing the effects they used. Had some fun going back to that old school type of filmmaking. But at the core of the problems of this movie, it all comes down to the script, to the story, to the humor that just wasn't working for me. And when you take those elements, those really important elements of a movie that they just don't work, I found myself not engaging with this film very much. I didn't really like Beetlejuice all that much. So if you're a big fan of the original Beetlejuice and you want to see more of it, I do think that there's things in here that are worth checking out, that are worth seeing and experiencing. But as a whole package, I don't feel like they cracked the code. I don't feel like they found the same charm that the original had. And for me, it mostly just didn't work. So for all those reasons, I'm probably going to give a pretty unpopular recommendation for Beetlejuice, as I'm not going to recommend Beetlejuice. It wasn't an experience that I had that much enjoyment with. What did you think of Beetlejuice? Tell me down in the comments section if you were a little bit more positive on it, or if you feel the same way as I do. If you want to see me be a little bit more positive on Beetlejuice, I showed my wife it for the very first time 2 years ago. You can check out her reaction right over there. And if you like 80s movies, I just ranked all of the Back to the Future movies. You can check those out over there as well. As always, guys, thank you so much for hearing me out. Don't just watch movies, talk movies. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.